solve global warming and feed the world. It would cost far less than you would think. One, we would need to reduce and then reverse desertification. We would need to preserve the historic site and become self-sustaining, and then become a world exporter of green food. The Sahara, a desert now, was once a tropical jungle. About 6,000 years ago, it was covered with grasslands and received plenty of rainfall. Before that, it was a tropical jungle. Is it even possible? It was proposed that Elon Musk give 2% of his wealth. But if these people gave 1%, that would be more than 10 billion, and two of them, including Warren Buffett, plan on giving 98% of his wealth before he dies. So if he just gave 10%, that would make this 15 to 20 billion. You probably are familiar with these people, but you may have forgot who these people are. Of course, this wouldn't happen overnight, and there would start an office in Colorado where we would purchase upgraded computer equipment and to run AI program. You need to know exactly how much pump you would to pump millions of gallons of water over hundreds of miles. Because of the war in Ukraine, a lot of things have gone up in price. But grain in Ukraine has actually come down in price. Now, there was a proposal from the UN that they think it would take $37 billion every year until 2030 to tackle both extreme and chronic hunger. But the vast majority, 27 billion, is just buying food and transporting it. Very little of it goes into solving this problem long term. They just give people money and food. That is not a long-term solution. So their plan is really a 400 billion solution. So there was a Twitter came back and forth about what they could do with $6 billion. But if you look at the plan, and they've been given more money than that, and it's not from a range of countries. There is a little helping local farmers plant, but when you look at this, where would they plant? So their 6 billion plan versus my 15 billion plan. It is mostly overhead, and for more than 20 years they have been attempting to fix the problem. $6 billion for 42 million people. Their plan is a country by country, mostly just giving people plan. And there is no global integrated plan for how to solve either global warming or world hunger. And my plan would do both. Remember that I am a polymath and neurodivergent. I have the ability to think outside of the box and come at problems in a holistic approach. My plan would, within 5 years, return the Sudan and a large part of the Sahara to a grassland, and a jungle, return it to a tropical jungle in my lifetime. The key is a couple Hercules aircraft. They, prior to the war in Ukraine, I could have easily purchased 2 of these aircraft for less than $1 million. I'm sure that they would have had to be a ground check and some upgrades to, like, these fuel pods. But so you're saying, why the Hercules aircraft and not things like the Global Lifter or the Antonov? One, because it is a little more fuel efficient for long hauls. It doesn't carry a huge amount of cargo, but you would be able to put this cargo where it is needed. Pallets of grain could be delivered actually to South Sudan. But there is a much larger haul that it could do if you are bundling and mixing the load. As I said, because of the Ukraine war, these aircraft are now $15 to $30 million. But as I said, Lockheed Martin has a maintenance plan that will take care of your aircraft. But in this region, security is of utmost. So why fly and not just ship all of these goods to North Africa? First, this would promote the freedom of the Russians and the Ukrainians. Because I would be live on Telegram and other Russian channels, we would see that Russians are being freed. I would hire both Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusian to help with this effort. Like I said, I would need to start with a recycled office, and I would primarily power that by solar power. I believe you need to understand things, both whether they are important and urgent. People starving to death is both important and urgent. So for me, the first step would be to attempt to help both Russians and Ukrainians not going into sexual slavery, but also using modern things like NFT and blockchain to make sure that this actual food is actually going where you want it to. So, in the past, you quite often, hey, you've sponsored this kid, here's a postcard from them. But we would be using NFTs, so within moments of this family getting food, you would get an NFT using GIS data that would show you that the family actually got this food. Of course, given that this is a war-torn area, the safety of my staff would come first. The first step would be to buy 400 tons of grain and sunflowers in the Ukraine and truck that. But then there would be 8 tons of frozen food and water filters for the Ukraine that we would also provide. Of course, being that warlords intercept most of the food going to southeastern Ukraine, I would have to secure and work with the local mob bosses. This is why I want to start in Dnipropetrovsk, because I already know the people locally and have come in contact with the local mob there. I also would be purchasing blast-resistant buildings that look like shipping containers, but they're not. So we are talking about miles and miles of large conduit to move as a Yank, I am used to acre feet, but I believe you call them hectare meters of fluid. The key would be using large pipes like this. I'm looking at a polymer pipe, which is less rough than these steel pipes, which of course would allow the water to flow with less friction. Polymer pipe, polypipe comes in 300 meters, which I think is close, or 300 millimeters, 3,000 millimeters. Sorry, I'm not good at equating. I don't think of equating millimeters in my brain inherently. So the very first step would just be piping seawater to the Sahara and growing algae, massive amounts of algae, and just by introducing a small amount of algae. Now, I would want to make sure that the water is clean, and so there would be some drying and bleaching of the salt water to make sure that non-known microbes are not introduced. And these cyanobacteria are that would naturally grow may be hard to be then produced to biomass. So I would be adding shrimp, which would be able to eat this bacteria. Of course, I would start with grass or ghost shrimp. These, though, tend to be more delicate, so I would be making salt tanks from filtered water and mixing it with the seawater to control, because these glass shrimp are so delicate to bad water, we would know that the water was good. Pumping hectares of water to the Sahara would not do anything alone without adding biomass. And I would add that biomass by adding clay and cocoa peat. There would be other methods, and you need to add iron to raise the alkalinity and salt resistant of high salt tolerant grasses. But there would also be a RAS aquaponics tank, which would be strange to put a lake in the middle of a desert. But because of this sealed environment, the water would not evaporate. I would also be using initially mostly native species, both Nile tilapia and mealworms come from the Nile region. There are several species of Nile tilapia. I would try all of the species and find ones that were working best. But like I would say, the largest thing we would start is simple algae culture, which is very carbon neutral. There are several different plans of how this could work. So unless you're interested in the individual plan, I won't go over it now. But the final plan would be to return the jungle to the Congo, or to Lake Chad. So we would start with growing things like pomegranates and dates, but also redwoods, which redwoods used to be pandemic. They used to grow everywhere in the world. The African species have died out, but they used to be there. So we would start with this grow house. Not exactly the same thing as a greenhouse, but close. This is a artist's conception of what the Lake Chad used to look like. And we would start with making this a brine marsh. And by using species that converts brine water to plants, this would remediate this desert. We would start this, like I say, it would be a grow house. So it would be like an earthship, a miles long earthship with these domes that would prevent wind from blowing sand from getting into the grow house. In theory, earthships only work in some climates. The only problem with the Sahara is water. And by adding millions of gallons a day of seawater, that solves that problem. The other problem, of course, is biomass. And that is why we would be using cocoa peat. Now, they will tell you that tires can be recycled, but really you're just reusing them, and that's what we would be doing, is we would be reusing tires from Europe and some shredded tires. Here is a YouTube video about someone's large-scale commercial aquaponics system, but we would be using a little aquaponics, but mostly sandponics. One of the amazing things is it's very easy to build, once you know how, to build a sand filter, which would then do some basic filtration and allow the algaeponics to take off. We would also be growing duckweed and sandponics, which they natively use Nile tilapia. We would also be adding both chicken and duck nitrogen to the system. If you thought I was done, so by just mixing sand and salt and cocoa peat and a little bit of clay, you build a grow bed for these plants. Then we would be using salt-resistant grasses and other plants. So we would drastically improve the biomass and biodiversity overnight, because everything is both AI and human managed. The growing efficiencies would be much higher. Humans and certain organisms need a completely different water. Humans absorb water best at a very alkaline, so we would be making very alkaline water for the humans. A lot of plants and certain types of fishes like a more acidic water. So we would be using both a very briny salt water based system first, but we would also then slowly be adding a freshwater system. and filtering this fresh water. Of course, then we would be recycling the vast majority of this fresh water through gray capture and through using things like a mincing toilet that would then allow full capture of the waste products. Again, just some facts about Bill Gates and Warren Buffett.